Having the art in the art therapy as a way to explore what the future might look like, to help with identity issues. It's a way to take it outside of themselves and talk about something else.
We're talking about the LGBTQ community as, I feel like we're talking about it almost as a culture. Do you think that that's an accurate way for us to say that we're talking about this like a culture?
I think it's very true because there's no one culture within, a culture is not just like a stamp and you're of that culture.
There's a lot of variations still within that.
And one way I really, when I'm teaching, talking with my students, it's when they start about cultural diversity and privilege and everything, to talk about if they've had siblings or not. And did your sibling have the same experience as you did growing up in the same home? And of course everyone's like, no, of course not, we're very different. I'm like, make sure you bring that innocence and that thoughtfulness to your clients, because you can't just label them as being part of the community, but how do they fit into that community? How is their experiences? How does the core, where their apartment was, if they grew up in an apartment, where in the building was that, and who were they next to? Or if they grew up in a farm, what were they next to, and how did that influence them? But the main thing to think about is we're just passing the first year anniversary of marriage equality, and so a lot of people feel that that coming out isn't a big issue. Sexuality, gender, it's all over the media, but on an individual basis, it still can be a very trying and traumatic experience. And having the art in the art therapy as a way to explore what the future might look like, to help with identity issues. It's a way to take it outside of themselves and talk about something else, and to create something in front of them, so with the artwork. And I just think having that avenue, that another way to express themselves, is very powerful. Because when you think about someone, it's not like they wake up and they know exactly who they are. If you're 12, 13, 14, no matter what your sexual orientation, no matter what your gender identity is, you don't know who you are. And then you layer that on where you're trying to figure out your gender identity, your sexual orientation. It's very complicated. And so having the art as a way to see the future, to see who they are, and to express themselves is really helpful. And whether that is working on a series of self-portraits, is one thing that I like to do with some of my adolescent clients is when they're trying to discover who they are, is to see how they're perceived by other people. So maybe doing a self-portrait, how their mother sees them, how their father sees them, how they see themselves, and see how they differ, so they can begin to see how they might be presenting in the world, and how people are seeing who they are compared to how they feel on the inside compared to the exterior self.
And you mentioned some particular examples of what we might call directives, kind of the nuts and bolts of what you ask them to do in an art therapy session, like the portraits. Could you kind of explain a little bit what a typical art therapy session might look like? If this camera was, peering over your shoulder at one of those sessions, how might that unfold, and what might you see?
It depends on the client. And most of the time, if I'm using a directive, it's more something that's spurred by the client. I don't have like a list of directives that I have planned out for the next 6 sessions. It's more about what's happening with the client at that moment. And I have one particular client that I terminated with recently. He started out doing the very quick, very powerful, very emotional stick figures. And I worked with him for about 3 years. In the last 6 months, it turned into more of art making, where he moved from like markers or pencils on paper to painting on canvas.
Wow.
And it was definitely art as therapy, and you could see him working out things in a very different level.
That's quite a progression from a stick figure to a canvas.
Yes, and he was very excited because he really liked what he was doing with the art, and it meant so much to him. And he was so much, even though he was on a very limited income, he used some of that income to buy his own art supplies. And so he wanted to continue that because he knew that we were at a time that basically accomplished most of his goals, and that it was time to terminate.
Do people ever come in hesitant to express themselves in this way, or do they come in knowing that this is the plan and they're ready to create?
Very good question. It is just like talking. Some people might feel very comfortable talking. Other people are very hesitant, and it's really being trained well as an art therapist to be able to sit with a client and sit with them and not look at them. You know, so they don't feel stared at and observed, but that you're sitting with them and being part of the art making, even though you're might not be making art with them. But it's a talent to be able to sit with the client that they feel supported and not observed.
Right.
But that's part of the holding. That you can create art in front of me. I'm not going to be judgmental. I'm not going to make corrections in it. It's about the process, the art making, not the final product.